social and environmental implications of dam projects. The Belo Monte Dam is the tip of the iceberg of an unprecedented wave of dam construction in the Amazon basin, fueled by narrow political and economic interests, with devastating and irreversible consequences for one of the world's most precious biomes and its peoples. 23 years after the historic first encounter of indigenous peoples of the Zinju in 1989, the Zinju Plus 23 gathering reaffirms widespread resistance to the damming of one of the Amazon's largest tributaries as a direct result of the Brazilian government's refusal to abide by domestic legislation and international agreements regarding human rights and environmental protection. Hundreds of affected fishermen, small-scale farmers, indigenous peoples, social movements, academics, activists, and other defenders of the Zinju River and other Amazonian regions will participate in the activities. While Rio de Janeiro, Brazil hosts some of the most powerful figures in global politics and economics at the Rio de Janeiro United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, the Zinju River in the heart of Brazil's Amazon forest will be the stage for an ongoing protest against the Belo Monte Dam complex. Protesters and affected communities will highlight the glaring gap between reality and the Brazilian government's rhetoric about Amazon dams as a source of clean energy for a green economy in a series of festivities, debates, and action. While the gathering on June 13th and 17th will be inaugurated on June 13th, a traditional day of festivities in Santo Antonio, other activities include a public hearing to debate violations of human rights and environmental legislation in dam licensing and construction. Altamira and San Antonio are both located along the Zinju River. In Australia, a meeting of representatives from across the continent gathered to confirm their intent to form a national unity government of the Sovereign Union of First Nations Peoples in Australia. This intent was confirmed with representatives formally signing an act of sovereign union between First Nations peoples in Australia. Michael Anderson, spokesperson for the Sovereign Union, said from Wollongong, the delegates acknowledged that having now stepped up to the plate of taking on this enormous task of nation building, not just at the national level, but at our local and regional levels as well. The most pleasing aspects of this movement is that the nation building has been organic within our communities throughout Australia. The grassroots people are using their own personal resources to bring their people together to rebuild their own nations and governance. It is important to acknowledge this effort because a sovereign union is a people's movement and they own it. This is not Australian government inspired nor funded. It was decided that any funds for the further advancement of the sovereign union movement is to operate on the basis of goodwill from the people of Australia. Wayne Copeland Wharton said, the time has come now for people not to just put their hands up and say they support. They must also understand they have obligations to commit themselves to working to fulfill our set objectives in nation building. The gathering concluded that the political significance of our Aboriginal embassies are vital to our sovereignty movement, as they represent a sovereign stand against an invader state and are an assertion of our rightful place in this country. Moreover, these embassies are not protest sites, and we will call upon the domestic and international community to recognize them as valid diplomatic missions and to be afforded standard diplomatic immunities. It is also important to understand that when these embassies are assaulted by superior force of the invader state, the people have a right to defend their sovereign independence. The sacred fire that burns at these embassies are a sacred spiritual essence uniting our people through our ancient songlines and dreamings. Our people will defend the spirit life that comes from the sacred fire. News sources today include Indian Media Ireland, First Peoples Human Rights Coalition, and Indigenous Peoples Issues and Resources.
And welcome back to First Voices Indigenous Radio, firstvoicesindigenousradio.org. You can go to sign on and see today's content of these interviews that we will be conducting today. Also, again, we are web streaming through Cinemingo Broadcasting Live Stream Video. Ustream, the letter U, stream.tv/channels/first-voices-indigenous-radio. So if you want to see what's going on in the studios here, then you can do that. So Yes, now to our guest. On May 13th, Haskell Indian Nations University students of Lawrence, Kansas, and advocates for cultural rights began a 2-month journey to Washington, D.C. to save the Wakarusa wetlands, Lawrence's only remaining indigenous wetland prairie, from becoming the South Lawrence Traffic Way. And they call the journey the Trail of Broken Promises, a primarily on-foot trek through 50 towns from Kansas to Washington, D.C., and are endorsed by former President William Clinton as a commitment made by Millicent Papillon that was accepted into the Clinton Global Initiative University. The Trail of Broken Promises also has been endorsed by the United Nations as a statement given by Papillon to the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Consultation Conference held May 3rd, 2012 at the University of Tulsa's Native American Law Center. And to tell us more about this Trail of Broken Promises, we are going to be speaking with Millicent Papillon, who is one of the students who was born from the Bitterwater people, from Whippoorwill of the Navajo Nation, and also a recognized descendant of the Black Nations. She also is a junior at Haskell Indian Nations University, enrolled as their Indigenous and American Indian Studies program. In the year she was president of the Wetlands in 2009-2010, president of the Wetlands Preservation Organization, which is an association on campus dedicated to raising awareness about the South Lawrence Traffic Way, the Kansas Department of Transportation proposed highway which would destroy the Wakarusa wetlands. And welcome to First Voices Indigenous Radio this morning, Millicent. Good morning. Yes, Millicent, tell us about this. The South Lawrence Traffic Way, and why it is so important to preserve what may be unknown to even the people who live in Lawrence, Kansas.
The South Lawrence Traffic Way is a proposed freeway that would go that would run through the wetlands behind Haskell Indian Nations University. The Wakarusa wetlands are a sacred place to the students of Haskell, and they have been for generations. So this freeway would essentially destroy a sacred place.
Why is it sacred?
Well, it's sacred for many reasons. You could start with the way that it was formed. 700,000 years ago, it was formed from the last glaciers of Kansas that melted. When the Oregon Trail passed through the Wakarusa wetlands, some settlers noted that there were Native American women picking Egyptian artichokes, singing, and then the Kaw Indians, who they had noted, or the Kansas Indians, were later relocated to Oklahoma, and the Wakarusa wetlands became like a classroom for about 30 years, where they would teach agricultural practices to the early students. It was also a way for early Haskell students to escape boarding school life. They had a harsh childhood. And just throughout the years, students have continued as the school has evolved from a boarding school into a four-year university. The students have evolved as well. And the wetlands have become a place of prayer, ceremonial practices, recreation. They're just a nice place to go and meditate and realign your balance between Mother Nature and your environment.
Millicent Papillon, there are stories, and maybe founded or unfounded, but the stories that have been heard through many decades about maybe
unmarked graves in that area of the wetlands. Is this one of the reasons why it would be deemed,
I would say, sacred?
Yeah. Over 1,200 students are still missing from Haskell University. The last person to be buried in the cemetery at our school was Cecilia May Fiddler. She died in 1943. I've heard stories of practices where they would say that the students were sent home sick, and if you look at the documents, it says that they were sent home sick. But when some of my teachers researched whether those students actually returned home, there was no evidence that they were returned home. But instead, what we're told is that they were driven behind Haskell University and buried in the wetlands. So some of the students who were even not missing were buried in the wetlands. And some of the students who were marked as runaways have been found in the wetlands.
In the stories that, being a former Haskell student myself, the stories that came out of there, and there was and presently is a graveyard of several hundred students from the young ages of 4 or 5 until 18 and maybe a little older, but also the things that I remember, and
you can help me with this, Melissa, is some of the students were really adopted by white parents because their native parents were either missing or taken care of in a way that they were no longer landholders in such places, scenarios like Oklahoma, where the land was Indian territory, but the discovery of oil also the non-native people wanting land and to be rich all of a sudden, what happened was that they would get rid of the parents and adopt the human child. Therefore, the land would revert to the non-native parents, and the non-native parents would send them to places like Haskell, and some of those kids were disappeared. And this is one of the stories that I remember. Do you remember, do you recognize that story at all?
Yeah, there's actually we heard a story exactly like that in the town that we were just in. It was the last town that we stopped in Indiana. It's called Danville, Indiana. It's about 20 miles west of the border, Indiana, Illinois border. I'm sorry, it's Danville, Illinois. And one of our hosts was a gentleman named John Dreyer. He's a member of the Crow Nation. His father was adopted and raised in Illinois. And so Mr. Dreyer had never actually known his Crow families. But he told us that his father was purposely adopted out as an infant, and he was never raised quote unquote Indian. And I remember he was really trying to let us know that happened, and that a lot of Native American families, if they could pass for being white, that they did, and they just didn't talk about being Indian anymore. But specifically at Haskell, what I think happened more was happened like with my grandma. She was raised in boarding schools, and she went to Haskell Indian Nations University in the later part of the 1940s. And she was orphaned, and nobody wanted to adopt her. And so the schools raised her. And that's all she pretty much knew was boarding schools. So it was part for the students who were wanted, and who, if they were the sons of chiefs or prominent Native American leaders, then they took their children to boarding schools and tried to assimilate them. And then it was part students who were unwanted, students that were orphaned or didn't have the right behavior that was, that was considered like bad behavior, or they acted up, or they ran away. They were sent to boarding schools as well. So it was a mix. And then there were some people who wanted to go to boarding schools because of state and reservations as well. There was parents who sent their students to boarding schools because they thought that they would have a better life not realizing that all of the atrocities that were happening there. And my uncle, who's traveling with us, Mr. Stanley Perry, that's what happened with him, with my grandmother, my mom's mom. She sent her kids to boarding school because she thought that they would do a better job raising him than she did. And you know, who's to say if that was true or not? Because I don't know. We'll never know.
Mm-hmm. Melissa Pepperson is one of the students with the Trail of Broken Promises, which are actually addressing the difficulty of preserving those sacred places within, and in this case, Lawrence, Kansas. But you are traveling and
prompted by the proposed highway construction through that wetland around Haskell campus, but also you're reversing the Potawatomi Trail of Death. Tell us a little bit about that. And then my second question would be that you have a proposal, a piece of draft legislation which has been approved by the National Congress of American Indians that would amend the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978, quote, to provide a right of action for protection of Native American sacred places such as the Wakarusa wetlands that we are mentioning behind Lawrence, Haskell Reservations in Lawrence, Kansas. Tell us about the reverse Trail of Broken Promises and the Trail of Death, I would say.
Well, the Trail of Death, it's March that happened September 4th, 1838. Around 850 Potawatomi Indians were marched from their home in Twin Lakes, Indiana, to Osawatomie, Kansas, over 60 days on a 660-mile journey. And so we walked the reverse of that, but we started at Independence, Missouri, and we've been following it since Missouri, so we haven't walked it from Osawatomie, Kansas. In most of the towns that we've been through, the demographics have been like less than, I would almost say 0.01% Native Americans. Most of the people who I've met on this Potawatomi Trail of Death, if they are Native Americans, they're lighter skin color and they're removed from generations. Their great-great-grandmother was, you know, and I get this a lot, and I'm going to say this like this because I've been told this a lot, was an Indian princess. And so a lot of the people who we've met on our journey haven't interacted with Native American, if ever, and the ones that have, you know, it's just different. It's like the further east we go, the less and less, the more and more isolated I feel. And you know, there's no reservations in Missouri, and there's no reservations in Illinois, and there's no reservations in Indiana. And it's sad because we walk this trail, and the numbers change on every single one of these plaques. We visit these plaques in these towns that tell us, you know, you're on the right trail. And on these plaques, the information doesn't match. You know, in Independence, and I'm just throwing out numbers, in Independence it might say 850, whereas, you know, in Danville, Illinois, it will say 800. And it's like they didn't even count or keep accurate records of these 850 so Potawatomi Indians that existed. So it's a little disheartening. It's also sad to know that the children were buried without names that were recognized, and they're buried in unknown graves, every single one of the Indians who died on this trail. And so we'll visit a marker, and yesterday we visited the marker right outside Logansport, Indiana, where the first child died, and they didn't have a name. And all that Shirley Willard could tell us, and she's the secretary of the Trail of Death Association, all she could tell us was that the mother carried her infant baby, her dead infant baby, to the next marker, which was 12 miles away from Logansport. And so we prayed. We prayed that these children had names, that we prayed that they had, you know, a nice burial, wherever that was, because we don't know. We pray that the mothers had names. It's just sad. It's really sad to see this, and it's more sad to see the reaction of the people. Some of the people are really nice and encouraging and really welcome, and we're really, really thankful. And you know, I could go on and on about some of the nice things that people have done for us. And then on the flip side of that, you know, some people have been really discouraging, and you know, a disgrace to, you know, what they've learned in their history books about Native Americans is disgraceful, you know, and what they say to me, to my face. I had some 14-year-old boys. We were camped outside Attica, Indiana, and some 14-year-old boys were standing outside my tent going, "Oh," and telling us, threatening to shoot us if we didn't leave. We, of course, didn't leave, and they just left. They were 14-year-old boys, but they're being, you know, taught in schools, in public schools, you know, and it's just like, what are they teaching them about Indians? You know?
Millicent, we're going to have to take a break here, and can you hang on to us? We want to talk a little bit about the American Indian Religious Freedom Act and that proposal that you're carrying there. So hang on for a minute or two. Thank you so much for this. First Voices, Indigenous Radio. We'll be right back.
Talkback is your gathering place for free and fair exchange of information and ideas. Heard here Monday through Thursday from 3 until 5 in the afternoon. I'm Hugh Hamilton. Join me as we explore the issues and events making news across the nation and around the world with expert guests, insightful analysis, and of course, your comments, questions, and observations. That's Talkback right here at WBAI New York.
We can get a line out here.
Two-day music and environmental festival takes place this year on June 16th and 17th at Croton Park, Croton, on New York, West End. The festival was inspired by activist musician Pete Seeger over 40 years ago. The Clearwater Great Colton River Revival will feature live performances by Peter Yarrow, Arlo Guthrie, Tom Praxton, The Plasmatics, Holly Meir, and many, many more. The festival will also showcase storytelling, green living episodes, educational displays, and exhibits. All proceeds will go to support Clearwater environmental education advocacy efforts to help preserve and protect the Hudson River. For more information about the festival, go to clearwaterfestival.org.
Hi, this is Eric Anderson. You're tuned to WBAI.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? This is LL Cool J.
This is Dave Martin. Hi, this is Tony Bennett.
Hi, this is Julie Cruz from New York City, and you're listening to
WBAI FM.
The soundtrack of New York City.
Non-commercial and with full entities. We're listener supported.
I don't listen to the radio.
I don't like stuff that sucks. You know what I mean?
You talking to me? This is First Voices Indigenous Radio. On the line, we have Millicent Michelle Efron, who is part of the Navajo River Goodwater people from that clan, and also recognized descendant of the Black Nation. Doing their last one in the Indian Nations University, and studying religions and American Indian Studies program. Millicent is part of the Broken Promises
group that is heading to Washington, D.C., and also they are carrying a document endorsed by President Clinton, a commitment made by by Millicent that was accepted into the Clinton Global Initiative University. And at the crux of the matter is to say that the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978 needs an amendment to provide, quote, to provide a right of action for protection of Native American sacred places such as the Wakarusa wetlands that we were talking about, and all of those unmarked graves throughout the United States that people just do not know that are there. Millicent, can you tell us about this proposal that you, in this piece of draft legislation that you're carrying to Washington, D.C. and former President Clinton?
Yeah, I met with former President Clinton at the CGI University Conference at George Washington University on April 30th. And when I met with him, I asked him if he would be interested in doing a CGI Native America. Are you familiar with the Clinton Global Initiative?
No, I'm not really.
Okay. Well, it was about 6 or 7 years ago. Former President Clinton, he made this thing. He made this initiative. It's called the Clinton Global Initiative, and basically he'll support and endorse people who make positive changes to their community through action. So Tom's Shoes, Tom's is the guy who, if you buy a pair of his shoes, then money will go to a third world country to help their improve their economies and give them small business loans. Tom's Shoes is a CGI commitment.
I see.
And so what people do is they submit their commitments to President Clinton. And this Trail of Broken Promises walk was a CGIU commitment, which CGIU is the acronym for Clinton Global Initiative University. It's specifically aimed at university on a global scale. So there's students from Haiti to Singapore, Iran, and the United States. Haskell Indian Nations University was the only tribal college that was invited last year. And our commitment is to raise awareness about the protection of sacred places. And what we're doing is we are carrying the Protection of Native American Sacred Places Act, which was given to us by Dr. Susan Harjo. She's a longtime Native American activist. And the way that she explained it to me was that in 1978 it was originally part of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, but was taken out before it was passed. And I believe this is the third time that they're going to try to amend it back onto that bill.
I see.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, go ahead. We have about a minute, Millicent.
Okay, so I just wanted to say this real quick. President Clinton is having a CGI America conference today and tomorrow in Chicago, Illinois, at the Sheraton Hotel and Towers, 301 Water Street. And we are proposing, we're going to walk from the Chicago Indian Center to the Sheraton Hotel and Towers starting at 8 a.m. And we're going to hand deliver a proposal for a CGI Native America, which will have people give commitments specifically to Indian country.
Wow. Okay, and I'd like to thank you for being here. And I know I wanted to make this last a little longer so we could really, suss out the details here. But thank you for joining us this morning. And I want to direct people to, if it's okay to give out your email, Millicent. Is that okay?
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. It's minipah@msn.com. Again, minipah@msn.com. Also, you can go to YouTube page, Twitter page, Tumblr page, or Flickr page, and I would just put in Trail of Broken Promises, and you would find that, and you'll find what the students from Haskell University are going through to help recognize and get the recognition, at least, of what we've talked about the last half hour. So thank you so much for being here this morning, Millicent and Papillon.
Oh, thank you so much, and this was a really great opportunity. You have a great day. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And now we have on the line, we have a longtime activist here, and we've had Roberto Rodriguez on the air quite a few times, and we want to talk a little bit about the Running to Defend Ethnic Studies. As we have reported earlier in the year, this is really going on, and as a result of the battle to defend ethnic studies, an incredible support nationwide has been created for Tucson's embattled Mexican-American Studies Department. And as far as the Tucson Unified School District is concerned, the department no longer exists. So we want to update people with that. Roberto Cintle, Dr. Cintle Rodriguez, thank you for joining us this morning on First Voices Indigenous Radio.
Good morning. Yes, the run that you spoke of took place this Saturday in the San Fernando Valley in LA. It was amazing to see the run, because not that it was a run, but that it was in LA. Because Tucson, we do that all the time. We've turned to running several years ago. The first time we did this in relationship to the department was in 2009, when we ran from Tucson to Phoenix in 115-degree heat, and it was an amazing run. It changed a lot of lives, a lot of the youngsters, and it changed them profoundly. And a lot of times people ask us, they think that we're doing it to against other people or things, etc. And I said, well, when we run, really it's for ourselves, it's for our communities, because we do plenty of rallies and protests and demonstrations and walkouts and building takeovers, arrests, all that. We do that all the time. Everybody has been involved in that for 6 years now. And, one thing that your listeners should know is that it's unique, this program. And the attack is very unique, but very much in line with a 520-year philosophy. This program was and is attacked because it is outside of Western civilization, meaning that the department teaches, what we refer to as Maiz philosophy, a philosophy based on corn. And it goes back 7,000 years, give or take, maybe that's not the exact day, but but again, as far as we know, it's about 7,000 years. And so the students are taught these concepts. Some of them are like In Lakesh, Pancheve, and Unabku, which is you are my other self, to seek the root of the truth, and then the explanation of the universe, which is Unabku. And apparently the school district does not like that. We're supposed to start with Columbus or start with the Pilgrims. And if we do that, they're fine with it. Problem is that, the mirror, and our memory, betrays that. Because, for some people, maybe they can accept that. But for a lot of us, when we look in the mirror, when we look deep within ourselves, we know there's something to us beyond, the Cortés or beyond Columbus. And when we seek that, and of course, much of that was taken from us, and the reason the Maiz philosophy works for us is because we eat that every day, because I think that the disconnection was very real. We know that. A lot of tribes are very much connected, or more connected, you might say. But a lot of people of Mexican descent, Central American descent, the disconnection is bigger because the forces of colonialism were intent upon making us forget, except that we have that daily connection with our food. It's like anywhere I am, wherever I go anywhere, I'll ask anybody, do you eat a tortilla? Do you eat a tamal? And on and on and on. And of course. And I said, well, that's our sustenance. That's been with us for thousands of years. When we eat the chile, when we eat the beans or the squash, we're eating something that goes back many thousands of years. And people make an instant connection. It isn't about like some fantasy out there somewhere. But no, that's part of our daily life. So when the state attacks, and they tell us to give that up, it's like, no, we're not going to give that up. They tell us to keep it inside the home. I was going, no, we did that already. We're also taxpayers, so we're not going to give that up, that right to minimally to learn. And that's what this is about, education. learning. Now what's awesome about all of this is that there's a movement afoot nationwide that it isn't about supporting Tucson, but rather planting those same seeds in every school district in the country. Because this country, you know, I always hear people say, among progressive people, people will say, this country was founded upon slavery. And years ago, people didn't even admit that. They would simply talk about the founding fathers and the Pilgrims and all that. Now people at minimum recognize slavery, but I always tell people, I said, well, actually that was one of a trinity of foundations, because the other trinities were, you know, genocide and land theft. But we don't begin our history with that. That's why the attractiveness of the Maíz philosophy. We don't start with colonialism. We don't start with interventions. You know, we start with creation. And for us, Maíz represents that.
You mentioned earlier in a previous show, Roberto, about the, you know, that the MAS studies were illegal and in other states as well, not just in Arizona. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, as it may go against what you just said, that the rest of America is really supporting this, but still they are still kowtowing to the history that started in 1492?
Well, that's precisely the point. See, that's what I'm, like my message whenever I go anywhere, I try to tell people, I said, look, Tucson was the exception. That is, in Tucson, we, you know, and a lot of the activists in Tucson fought to teach those concepts to little kids. I'm talking about pre-K, K through 12. Meaning that was in a school district. Whereas you go, say, Chicago or L.A. or San Francisco or Albuquerque, you know, Phoenix, anywhere else, they weren't teaching that. That's why I mentioned the 520-year program. That was the whole point of colonialism. You know, I think I've mentioned it before. You know, in what is today the U.S., people would call it boarding school. You know, but in the points south and in some parts of the Southwest, there was a program called Reducciones. And the Reducciones was the identical process, but at a much bigger scale. The Reducción was the what people call those little quaint, what do they call those churches? Missions. Yeah, it was the mission system. You know, and bigger than the mission system. It was, again, identical to the boarding school. It was kill the Indian, create a Christian. That was the project. You know, they thought that everything about us, including their foods, was demonic. You know, they actually made amaranth illegal for 300 years because they associate it with ceremony. And so what I'm saying is that the standard or the status quo for all these years has been not to teach, you know, pre-1492. And if you teach it, you know, as diabolical, you know, as anti-God, all the worst things that people could think of in the Western society. That was it. So that's why even to this day, that's why I was saying that amongst Mexican people and Central American peoples and South Americans, like we've been brainwashed to think that things indigenous are evil. And so that's why you have a lot. So it isn't so much shame, like looking in a mirror and being ashamed of your color, but it's been kicked into us that it's somehow evil. And so that's the big task. And I think that's what they're afraid of, because in Tucson, I mean, not only were kids learning their history, but they were succeeding. I mean, you're talking about the worst kids in school all of a sudden become A students. And that's the key to the whole thing. Mr. Horn was asked, I goes, wait a minute, all your students are 97, it was almost 100% graduation rate, you know, and over an 80% rate of college going rate. And he was asked, what about these numbers? Doesn't that say something good? And he says, who cares about the numbers? What we're concerned with is that they're not learning Western civilization. You know, so that's what a lot of people don't seem to know, that it's a literal 520-year battle. It's the same battle. They don't want us to know our history, our culture. And really what it really is all about is teaching us of what it means to be human. And they seem to think that there's but one route to that.
the human route that they call it, it's the education process and I think of course 1492, but also was supported by the 1493 papal bull stating that there were no human beings in the Western Hemisphere, and because we did not believe in that dogmatic God, that they could come and claim and tame the Western Hemisphere for themselves. And that continues. Tell us, we have a couple minutes left here. Tell us about that draconian SB 1070, that state measure that has been copied by states across the nation. Tell us where that's going, if it has gone anywhere. Of course it has gone in someplace. But is there any measures that the people are wanting to bring forward to the nation, to the president, or how can things get done to reverse that process?
Yeah, well, I think we're all in a quandary about that because, for obvious reasons, I think a lot of us are not expecting a good decision. But see, one of the things that people also should know is that SB 1070 is simply the localization of a federal policy. And I know you know that, and a lot of us know that like literally being red, being brown is a crime already, according to the federal government. That is, and the border used to be confined to what was near the Mexican border. Now literally the entire nation is the border. So if you're red-brown, you are subject to being interrogated, et cetera, by, again, a federal system that is massive. I think it's about 5 times bigger than it was just about 2 decades ago. And so what SB 1070 is now the codification of something that already exists. The worst part is you probably heard about, there's several other programs, Secure Communities, the 287G program, all of that. In fact, let me tell you one thing real quick. I believe it was 1 month prior to SB 1070 being signed, 800 federal agents descended upon Tucson, and I think parts of Phoenix, but mostly Tucson, and literally occupied the south side, the south side community of Tucson. And with what authority? They didn't need SB 1070. They have done that already. So that's what I'm getting at, is that we've been living this. It's been encroaching on us year after year after year. It's normalized. And so now SB 1070 is the big boogeyman, because now it gives rogue governors and rogue police officers the legitimate right to do what the federal government does. And we're pretty close to that. I think we're going to have to wait till the Supreme Court changes, because I don't expect good things out of this. It's sad, see, Tucson, we're used to all this stuff. But I think what the problem is going to be is, like you say, when it begins to spread, and it already has. 23 states have already done copycat legislation. Alabama is worse, Georgia. And, the worst states, think about it, is the Deep South. What is that about? There's very few migrants over there in a relative sense. But there's still that idea that somehow brown people, red-brown people don't belong in certain parts of the country, apparently.
Well, Roberto,
that's what SB 1070 is about. And yeah, there's going to be major resistance nationwide.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I just wish maybe there should be some of that already, for what already exists. I'll give you one example of something that's really, it's ugly. It's called Operation Streamline, and it has nothing to do with SB 1070. Every single day, 70 people, and there's 5 of these programs nationwide, but every day in Tucson, you walk into the courtroom, the federal courtroom, and on the left side, you have about 70 brown people, and they're like 5'4" and under. Mostly indigenous people from the South, chained up by their ankles, their wrists, and their waist. And within 1 hour, every one of them is tried, convicted, sentenced, and of course to a private prison. All of this is a money-making effort. Sometimes you think that all this propaganda is that propaganda, and it is. I think the super rich, the private prison industry plays with the politicians to create fear within people, so that in the end it's really about profit. CCA is threatening not only this this particular program to expand it, but they want to buy prisons nationwide under the same idea, promising like 80% occupancy. That's where we're going right now. I mean, it's bizarre. I mean, I don't know. I think people need to start. The minimum they need to do is go into one of these operations, and because if you want to see what apartheid looks like, even under apartheid, you didn't have a system like that.
Well, Roberto Rodriguez, Dr. Cintlay Rodriguez, we're going to have to leave it right there to this time, and we're going to be returning to you in the future. And thank you for joining us this morning on First Voices Indigenous Radio.
Yeah, and just remember, this month is when we expect SB 1070 to be ruled upon by the Supreme Court. Okay, well, we'll check with that. Thank you so much this morning. And this is First Voices Indigenous Radio, and thank you to Sinaminga for web streaming this morning's broadcast here at video, ustream.tv/first-voices-indigenous-radio. That's what it was. And maybe next week you'll see it. Right now we're going to go to the Mahina Movement from the album Speak the Fire, and we'll go out with that, The Wall, and it's appropriate. Thanks for joining us.
There's a wall inside my heart, and my heart is my land, and my land is my home, and my home is everything I am. There are soldiers who kill and take my water from me, and I thirst for the will to keep on fighting to be free.
I am the daughter of a bastard race, born out of rape and colonialism.
Hi, I'm Ella Joyce, and when I'm in New York, I listen to WBAI 99.5 FM. The more you listen, the more you learn.